Hello and welcome to another episode of How Are You Holding Up? A mental health podcast by the depressed for the depressed. I'm Lindsey.
And I'm Chris.
And the first question I want to ask you, Chris, how are you holding up? Oh, good. ASMR.
I'm in a very low state. I have been feeling lower and lower every day, and my mask of being able to be a human being is definitely starting to slip. So I'm not great. Not good.
In what ways do you think your mask is slipping?
I'm not able to hide my symptoms as much.
Like at work, you think?
At work or in my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very kind of follow up from last week's episode. I have been isolating the shit out of myself.
Yeah.
I've taken a few opportunities that I could have had over the last week to like go and spend time with friends and just kind of cut them out and been like, nope, sorry, can't, too busy, or there's not enough money, or, you know, whatever excuse I can make up at the time. And I've been kind of relying on that, which has been great. I did go out once, at least, and I went and I enjoyed a midnight screening, which was fun.
Good.
Lindsey, how are you holding up?
I'm okay. I'm not, like, stellar because of certain things that are happening in my personal life, especially with where I am living right now. But I'm not having difficulty getting up in the morning.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
And it leads us to today's topic. Ironically enough, the condition that I'm actually diagnosed with and am currently in a very low state, so it's not the usual mood I'm in. Persistent Depressive Disorder, otherwise known as being functionally depressed, otherwise known as Dysthemia. Now, for most of our audience, I would say probably they have a depression or an anxiety or something that they're going through. And perhaps they can trace it back to a time when it started. For some, it might be a little more fluid, and it's not nearly as obvious as like, hey, this is when I was depressed.
Yes.
Dysthemia, for all intents and purposes, is kind of that slow roll into depression, where you're maybe not as peppy, or you're not feeling as upbeat, or maybe you're just kind of withdrawing a little, but it's nothing out of the ordinary. You know, we all have low times and blah, 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 but when it goes on for months and years and decades, it is now, and it's never been anything that's been really like bad. Like you may have had thoughts, or you may have had dark places that you've gone to, but you've never been unable to get out of bed. You've never been unable to like take care of yourself, and you know, it's something that it could be considered not necessarily a mild grade, but not a heavy depression. That is where dysthemia falls in.
Yeah, so, you know, like the little of just loss of interest of daily activities, kind of you have a lack of energy, you might have trouble concentrating, you might be less productive or effective, you avoid social situations, and you just either you eat too much, you eat not enough, sleep problems. Those are some of the symptoms that are listed under dysthemia, which are also listed under, you know, major depression, but it's just to a lesser degree.
For example, like when I was in the lowest part that I was ever in, and I just didn't want to get out of bed or do anything, I didn't want to go to work, and when I was at work, I was literally checked out the whole time. I felt low, and I felt, to a degree, suicidal. But I don't know, I never really went too far down that rabbit hole. A major depressive episode, that rabbit hole looks really good.
Mm.
It's promising almost.
Mm.
But that's kind of, it's kind of rough, because I mean, I would love to speak from experience on more of the dysthemia stuff, but at the moment I'm definitely not.
Well, I can talk a little bit more about that. I was a pretty happy kid. I would say a lot of scary things happened when I was little, but I was still happy. I still had like a good mood, a normal mood for a child.
Mm-hmm.
And then around 13, 14, everything changed and it never went back to normal. And I struggled with energy. I always wanted to sleep too much. I had a hard time connecting to people. I often avoided people. And then looking back, it's like, well, middle school's a hard time. You were introverted. You were going through weird body changes. But, again, in high school, like, I just never was a happy person.
Yeah.
And I think I was pleasant. What's like a good, like, people, when they looked at me, I seemed fine. I wasn't crying in the corner, like the over the top melodramatic.
No, you wouldn't have been considered.
Imagine.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been considered like, oh, they're so fucking depressing. They're
No.
depressing to be around.
Yeah.
Like those kind of attitudes where it's like, I don't want to be around that person. They're a downer.
And I had those. And, things that triggered that were usually big life events, big breakups, big fights,
Sure.
would trigger the major depression. But nothing really happened to trigger dysthemia for me. And the causes are usually, biological differences. Brain chemistry is an inherited trait. A lot of people in my family are known for mental illness. So that's kind of the gift that I have been given genetically. But of course, that's not to say that somebody who hasn't gone through a traumatic life event wouldn't get dysthemia. So if you had a really terrible like death in the family, or you moved and it was really stressful and you're lonely, you can still have, it can be triggered by something.
Of course.
But my experience wasn't that.
Yeah, I was going to say, beside the whole like traumatic genesis of it, there's always the possibility that, like you said, it could just be a multitude of little things. It could be nothing at all. Yeah. You could just suddenly wake up one day and the world doesn't feel bright and vibrant. The world
doesn't go back.
And it doesn't go back. The world feels a cold, gray shell of what you used to know it as.
Yes. And what's confusing for me is I have days where I'm really great. Like, I'm doing fine. I have energy. I feel capable. And then suddenly it can be halfway through a day like that, and it's gone. And I'm suddenly unable to connect as much to a partner or friends. I start avoiding them, and I just go through this weird, and I don't know, I try, and I, with all this therapy that I've done, you guys, and all of this research, because I love researching and reading books and looking at YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, talking to people, I have tried to take control of my depression and my life and stop blaming events or people. But you do need to look at what's going on in your life to kind of see, well, what triggered this? Why? And sometimes it's just like there's nothing, and there's so frustrating. That is so frustrating for me, because that means I can't control it and I can't stop it.
Yeah, I've been very much a passenger in my own life lately. When I'm at work, I put on my mask. I do my human things.
Your human things.
I do my human things. I go and I be a productive member of my society that I've chosen to be associated with. And then I get home and I either disassociate completely, or I'm so withdrawn from... I used to be able going to use the spoons example. I used to be able to, like, go home and wash my spoons. I would calm myself. I would go and I would
Explain
do something.
The spoons thing, 'cause people don't know the
Sorry.
spoons.
If I haven't, I know we've discussed
a couple times.
Yeah, we've discussed the spoons theory. It basically, you only have so many spoons throughout the day that you can use. It's basically like your energy, and every time you do something that is stressful or strenuous or even remotely,
uses
energy, you give a spoon away. And you only have so many spoons that you can use in that day. So what I would do is I would go home, I'd wash my spoons, and I would get them ready for the next day. Lately, it has been feeling more like my spoons are just getting chucked straight in the garbage. And then the next day I go, oh yeah, hey, that's right. I should probably wash wait, where'd they go?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck it. I'll just grab them out of the trash and I'll just use them again. And I'm in that state of I can only use the spoons so many times before somebody starts noticing, hey, there's like garbage on yours. Is everything going okay? And then I'm having to like wipe them off of my pants and be like, no, it's okay. They're fine. See, they're clean.
Everything's great. When I start getting, and I didn't used to understand when I was kind of falling into the depression.
Mm-hmm.
I just completely lost my train of thought. Yeah, you kind of don't want to be depressed, right? So it's like, well, I'm not depressed. I'm just having an off day.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't sleep very well, or I had a weird meal, or, well, I had this kind of strange conversation, so I'm just feeling weird about that, and it'll go away, and like a couple days go by, and you're like, cool, so I'm definitely not feeling great. And so then what I used to do, and I still do sometimes, because I'm not even remotely close to being perfect, is I start to try to medicate it with doing maybe too much. So hanging out with too many friends, trying to avoid my emotional problems, playing too many video games, drinking too much, eating too much, or not healthy. Anything to make me feel anything at all. To kind of kickstart something.
Yeah.
And I end up just making myself worse, and then using more energy than I meant to, and making promises to people that I can't follow through with because I just don't have the energy. And I make myself sick, and I hate myself. And so that's the delightful. And it's hard to go to therapy with it too, because you go to therapy if you can't afford it, and you go, and it's like, you can't fix it.
No.
Usually there's no, pointer. So what I have to do is stop drinking, stop allowing myself to drink, force myself to do extra self-care. But even then, it's like, I don't want to. And that's what I should do, right? That's what you should do. You should take better care of yourself when you're not doing well. You should treat your depression as though you are sick or you are hurt physically. Yeah. Of course, we don't do that because we aren't taught to do that. And also, sometimes it doesn't work.
Sometimes you're honestly, it's the only way that, kind of following that same analogy, is you feel like you've broken your leg. You've just been in a horrible accident. You've broken your leg, and instead of crying out in pain or going to the hospital or doing anything remotely constructive to try and make yourself better, you're lying on the ground and just going, cool.
And you try to start playing soccer because you think if you ignore it and you play soccer on it, maybe it's not broken.
Yeah. It's fine.
It's not crippling, it's fine.
No, it's fine. No, the crunching sound, that's just extra soccer getting into my brain. I can't speak.
Another interesting thing with depression, sometimes your speech is affected. So is it permanent? Can you break out of the funk? What do you think, Chris? So it depends on everybody, and no one's going to give you the same answer, and it's different for everybody. I said that already.
I mean, it's true though, and it does bear repeating. But okay. So I'm going to talk to you and the audience with the two parts of my brain real quick. There is the part of me that actively wants to be better. There's the part of me that believes that everything that we are going through on purpose, and we are going through to learn and improve ourselves. And every difficulty we face along the way is something that we can just learn from and get better by. That is not the part of my brain that currently has the steering wheel in my life.
Mm-hmm.
The current part of my brain that has the steering wheel in my life is, yes, this is going to last forever. And yes, I'm going to feel this fucking horrible always, all the time, no matter what I do. And it's not getting any better. And I'm scared that I'm just lost completely. And that there's no point in me doing anything remotely good with my life because it is just going to turn to ash. That part of my brain has a little bit easier of a time speaking, and that sucks. It sucks that it has not only an easier time, but a little more fluid thought. Like, the other part of my brain struggles, and it really is fighting an unending battle. But that said, the fact that it is fighting, and the fact that it is there, gives me a small modicum of hope that it is right. And that it might be something that, through time and patience, not only with the process, but with just myself and my ability to adapt to the process, that I can kind of pull myself out of this and live to fight another day.
Here's the good news. Whether you are incredibly financially successful and popular and have hitting all of your goals, or you are at the lower end of your income and you're not doing so great, everybody is affected by depression. Mm-hmm. The reason this is a good news is because if you are sitting right now in your life and you're thinking, if only I had followed my passions and my dreams, if only I had made that salary increase, if only yes, you would, there'd be certain things in your life that would be different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your depression would be any different. So you can stop blaming yourself for your depression. Mm-hmm. And know that, like with anything, it's not permanent. I'm going to say that there are very few cases where somebody has a lifelong depression. Mm-hmm. Science is still studying it. They're still figuring out a lot of stuff. For you, Chris, I remember at the very beginning when we were first doing the podcast, 42 episodes ago, we did one of the episodes and we started off by saying, we're running a depression podcast, but neither of us feel very depressed. And so we feel like we're fakes.
now I feel like a fake telling people that things are going to be good because I don't personally believe it. So yeah, that's a very good point.
So it's I think the cool thing for me with this podcast is when I get into a real bad depression, or even just one where I have brain fog and I forget, and your memory gets weird and you think it's always been this way and it always will be this way, and there's so much fear. Having this podcast for me personally has been good because I can look back at times where I was okay. We were okay. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to remember that when you're in the depths of it because you've lost all ability to conjure up any of those chemicals. We've talked about this in the past. It is so hard to conjure up good feelings.
Yeah.
So memories become bland. So Chris, what are you doing to get through?
Not a goddamn thing.
And sometimes that's all you're going to do. You're just not going to do much of anything and you're going to feel like shit and you're going to go through. But I think what's important is that everyone work on breaking down the stigma of this.
Yeah.
This is not something that is just for weak people. So many people think that, if you have depression, you're weak or something. And I think even you and I sometimes feel that way.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
If I were a stronger person emotionally, if I just had a better mindset.
If I could go back 5-10 years and be the person I was then.
Yeah.
I liked that person. I'm not that person anymore. And that's wasted energy. Clinging to an image of, this person that had completely different circumstances,
Yeah.
different lifestyles, different everything. You are not the person you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You're hardly the person you were a week ago.
Yeah, feeding the negativity is something that's so easy to do because you're just looking for anything to point to. Like, if only I could do this.
Yeah. And there is a sort of attitude that feels like it should be an ally, and sometimes it does become just an enemy. Is that thought of, referring back to our perfection episode,
Yeah.
that feeling of, I can do anything. I can be anyone. I can be anything. And you set your goals so incredibly high, and it makes the failures not stepping stones anymore, but stumbling blocks, which they should never be anything but stepping stones. It should be learning experiences, things that you are going to experience on your journey, because that's what life is.
I have a question for you, because you are in a different headspace than I am.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me to speak in a little bit more positively than you are. Do you feel like right now, if you take more control over what you do with talking to yourself, like you don't allow yourself to talk negatively, if you start being more aware of how you're eating and you really focus on eating really well, keeping hydrated, not engaging in too many downers like drinking, do you think that would help? Or does that sound absolutely impossible and exhausting?
I honestly don't know.
Because we preach that sometimes, that if you just do extra good for yourself, if you do that extra emotional aid, that it could possibly help.
And that's one of the things that has been the biggest challenge with this particular down that I've been going through, has been, there's a lot of things I could do that would probably help my mental state. I'm not going to do them. The idea of doing anything outside of the bare minimum is completely and totally foreign to me. It is as it is as unlikely for me to do something about myself and make myself feel good as it is for me to be made to feel good by someone else. That I feel so utterly removed from my own happiness at this point that I don't know what it's going to take to snap out of it, and I'm just gonna have to keep trucking because that's all I've got.
Are you seeing your therapist?
He's on vacation for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So no.
Okay.
So that's something I'll talk with him about when he gets back, but for the time being, I'm kind of just out here.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've noticed with us is that we get really embarrassed about how depressed we are, so it becomes this joke that we kind of like joke like, oh, we're not doing well, and but we don't want people to actually take it seriously and be worried about us, because it's almost too much. That feels incredibly uncomfortable.
That's why I isolate. I don't want people to I'm at that point now where I've been more open in communicating my depression and when I'm down and when I'm low. And there's nothing wrong with when you don't have something to say by just saying, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But when you hear that so much, it loses
value.
I'm at that point now where like every time I hear, I'm so sorry you're going through this, I'm like, and even when I say it, because I say it a lot too, I'm just like, don't be sorry. It's just what it is.
If somebody was like, hey, my friend is going through depression that's just like yours right now, and I don't know how to help them, what do I do? What would your advice be? Like for you personally, what would be something that you think would be helpful at all? Would somebody coming over and bringing you healthy food, like, hey, I'm going to make you dinner tonight? Would, like what?
I'm really struggling to
Come up with something.
think of something. Yeah, to be like, I really, when I say I see no light anywhere at the end of the tunnel, I don't even see the tunnel anymore. It is pitch black. And the only thing that I could say is if you or someone you know is going through that kind of darkness where there's no good, there is no hope, there is no light, there is just existence, your best course for them would just be to not abandon them.
That's good advice.
They feel alone. They feel isolated. They feel withdrawn. Even unless they just straight up tell you to just leave them alone and go away, don't leave them alone. Don't go away.
Something that helps me is when people keep inviting me to stuff, but also let me know that it's okay if you don't come. Like, hey, I want you there. I know that you're going through a hard time right now, but I just want you to know that you were invited to this thing, and we'll be thinking of you. If you can't come, that's okay. I still love you.
Yeah, that's a very good.
Like you want to feel included, but sometimes you just can't. And then you feel guilty turning them down. So letting somebody know that it's okay that they're not coming. And try not to take it personally, dude. Depression is so draining.
Yeah.
It takes everything.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Don't abandon the ship. Chris, don't abandon the ship.
I don't even see a ship, I swear to God.
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. Is there any closing notes you wanted to mention?
No, other than the usual diatribe. Here, let me put on my podcast voice.
Here we go.
As for us, follow us on Instagram at HAYHU Podcast, like our Facebook page, subscribe to the subreddit, and if you want to send us something directly, go ahead and email mailbag@howareyoholdingup.com.
It really lifts our moods when we hear from you. There's been a few messages we've gotten that kind of made me tear up, so thank you when you do reach out. It means the world to us.
Yes.
And as always,
don't tell us to just get over it.